remember the sound before the light went out. It wasn't the shriek of artillery or the grind of collapsing ferrocrete. It was the hum, that endless, holy hum that filled every corridor of the hive. The sound of life itself, of machines still turning, of prayers whispered through vents, of billions breathing in rhythm with the Emperor's unseen will. When that hum stuttered, we all felt it in our bones. For a heartbeat, the hive seemed to hold its breath. Then came the silence, and the fall. I was just another worker among the billions, an anonymous spark in a sea of labor and ash. But when the power grids failed and the underhive lights died, the world beneath the world began to eat itself. The walls sweated black oil, the air turned sweet with decay, and the vox channels filled with whispers that sounded too much like prayers. They said the upper spires were sealed, that the nobles had abandoned us, that the Emperor's gaze no longer reached this deep. I didn't believe them. Not at first. Not until the screams started echoing up from the sump. If you've ever wondered what happens when a hive city, the beating industrial heart of the Imperium, stops beating, stay with me. Like, share, and subscribe so these stories from the forgotten depths can keep echoing across the void. Every voice that remembers keeps another soul from vanishing into the dark. The first thing to die was the hum. Every hive world has it. The low, constant vibration that seeps through walls, pipes, even dreams. It's the rhythm of the Imperium's pulse-made metal. When you grow up inside a hive, you stop noticing it. You eat to it, sleep to it, pray through it. It becomes part of you. But the day it stuttered, something inside us stuttered too. I was a line worker in Manufacturum Theta 9, deep in the mid-hive levels where the air never tasted clean and the sky was only a rumor. My shift began with the usual ritual, 3 recitations of the Litany of Function, 1 whisper of thanks to the Omnissiah, then the first ignition of the assembly line. Sparks flared, pistons coughed, the great chains rattled. The servitors' eyes glowed like dying candles as they hammered out parts for weapons we'd never see. The smell of promethium and oil was the closest thing we knew to air. Then the line stopped. Just a shudder at first, a hiccup in the rhythm. A few workers looked up confused, like sleepers disturbed by thunder. Then the entire system groaned as though the hive itself had taken a breath it couldn't exhale. The lights flickered once, twice, then went black. In the silence that followed, no one spoke. We waited for the backup systems, for the red lumen strips to ignite along the walls. They didn't. The darkness wasn't just absence, it was presence. Heavy, alive. You could hear the creak of metal contracting, the soft drip of condensation falling from unseen heights. Somewhere far away, something massive ground to a halt. Someone near me muttered a prayer. Another began to cry. And above us, through a shaft that reached all the way to the hive's upper veins, we heard it. A distant boom, like the sound of a cathedral collapsing in slow motion. Dust rained down, fine as ash. When the overseers finally arrived, they weren't shouting. They were whispering. Vox units sputtered with static and no orders came through. The tech adepts tried to awaken the backup generators, but their Binharic chants dissolved into confusion. The cogitators displayed nothing but error sigils, and one adept began to bleed from his nose, staring blankly at the dead screens. Hours passed. No light returned. We began to feel the air thickening. More moisture than usual, metallic, wrong. The servitors kept twitching long after their power should have run dry. One raised its hammer arm halfway, then froze mid-motion, eyes flickering with dying light. By the second day, food distribution had halted. The lifts between sectors failed, and rumors began to bleed through the Vox channels. Explosions in the upper spires. Arbites barricading the transit shafts, noble families sealing their gates. Someone said the Adeptus Mechanicus had declared the hive spiritually compromised. Others said the governor had fled to orbit. We didn't know what to believe. We just knew the hum was gone, and nothing could live without it. By the third day, the dark started to change. Shapes moved where no lumen should reach. I remember leaning close to a vent grill and hearing whispers. Not words, just the sound of something breathing. The heat exchange units still pulsed occasionally, pushing air through the vents like the heartbeat of a dying god. When the first fires started, they burned blue. Someone had tried to siphon fuel from a promethium line and ruptured it. The flames raced along the ducts, lighting up the walls like veins in a corpse. For a moment, the hive came alive again. We could see each other's faces, gaunt, smeared with ash, eyes wide. And in that flickering light, we saw what the dark had been hiding. The walls were bleeding. Not blood, not human blood, but black oil mixed with something else, something warm. The air shimmered where it touched, and it smelled like burnt copper and rot. The Mechanicus acolytes called it biocorruption. The rest of us just called it evil. That night, the first scream echoed through the hab levels. The scream came from the lower gantries and sharp, human, and swallowed almost instantly by the vastness of the hive. We froze. You could tell by the way sound carried that it wasn't close. It was deep, from the sump shafts below where no one went unless ordered and no one came back unless escorted. Still, people began to move. Instinct, fear, curiosity. Some whispered that the underhivers had started to riot, that the enforcers were cleansing sectors, that it was just another purge. But the way the echo lingered, it wasn't the sound of a riot. It was the sound of something being found. I remember following the others through the half-lit corridors, guided by the faint glow of our makeshift torches, ripped cabling and ignited rags soaked in promethium residue. The heat from them was bitter, chemical, but better than the dark. Each step we took seemed to wake the floor. The metal groaned beneath our boots, sending small vibrations through the grating like the heartbeat of something buried deep below us. We reached the first collapse near Section 19. A pipe had ruptured, filling the air with steam and stench. There was movement behind it, silhouettes twitching, shifting. For a moment I thought they were survivors. Then one of them turned its head and the lumen glare caught its face. The skin was slick with black sludge, not painted or burned, absorbed. Like the hive itself was reclaiming what belonged to it. The worker didn't scream, didn't speak. He just kept moving his jaw as though whispering a prayer. Then his eyes rolled white and he collapsed, trembling violently. A few of us dragged him back toward the main corridor, but when we looked down, his fingers had already begun to dissolve into the metal floor, like wax melting into heat. The Mechanicus adepts called it machine spirit backlash. I called it damnation. By the time we reached the living quarters, people were already changing the way they spoke. They stopped saying "if we survive" and started saying "if he wills it." Every death became an offering. Every loss a test. The hive wasn't just dying. It was turning us into pilgrims of its decay. At night, the vents whispered again. I pressed my ear against the cold grill and heard the faint pulse of a Vox signal. Not one from the command deck, but from below. The words were indistinct, but the tone was rhythmic, deliberate. Like chanting, a repeated phrase that might have been "glory in the depth." I didn't tell the others. I just listened until sleep found me. The next morning the air was thicker and the light weaker. The torches had started to fail, their fuel evaporating faster than before. Without them, the corridors were little more than ribs of shadow and noise. You'd hear metal clicking where nothing walked, water dripping from ceilings you couldn't see. Sometimes it felt like the hive itself was breathing, slow, wet, patient. We tried to make our way upward, toward the transport rails, but the lifts were dead, the stairs sealed by fallen debris. The only open route led downward into the maintenance tunnels, the kind of place that even enforcers avoided, where pipes ran like arteries and the walls sweated with condensation that tasted faintly of iron. That's where we found the first bodies. They weren't torn apart or burned. They were empty, as if something had drawn the life out of them and left only skin and uniform behind. No marks, no blood, just a hollowness that didn't belong in flesh. One of the adepts muttered that the machine spirits had begun to feed. Another said the hive was purging weakness. I wanted to believe either of them, because both explanations felt easier than the truth, that we were simply being forgotten. By the end of the fourth day, our torches dimmed for the last time. The dark came back, patient and absolute. It wasn't just around us, it was in us. The hum of the hive was gone, and in its absence, my heartbeat sounded wrong. Too loud, too slow. Somewhere above, something exploded. The sound rolled through the ducts like thunder, followed by a rain of dust and shattered insulation. For a fleeting second, we saw the faintest glimmer of daylight far above, a slit of white cutting through the ceiling, impossibly distant, like a god's eye cracked open just to watch us die. That light vanished as quickly as it came, and when it did, someone behind me whispered, "The Emperor has turned his face." I wanted to shout at them, to tell them to stop, to pray louder, to do something, but all I could do was stare into the dark and feel it stare back. That was the moment I knew the hive wasn't just failing, it was falling. The fall didn't come as a single moment of collapse. It came as a slow surrender, like the hive was exhaling after a lifetime of holding its breath. Every corridor, every machine, every soul inside it seemed to understand that something sacred had been severed. By the 5th day, we stopped counting hours. The chronometers had frozen, the Vox lines were dead, and the glow from the emergency lumens had faded to a faint bruise of red across the walls. Those of us who remained alive began to cluster together for warmth, for prayer, for denial. I remember sitting with 20 others inside an abandoned maintenance bay. The air smelled of rust and salt. Someone had painted the Imperial Aquila on the floor in engine oil and lit candles around it. The wax melted into black puddles that clung to our boots. We prayed. Not the way we were taught. Not the long sanctioned liturgies of the Ministorum, but the kind of prayers born from fear. The raw, unregulated ones that sound more like begging. We prayed for the hum to return, for the lights to flicker, for the Emperor to hear us through all this metal and ash. But what answered wasn't divine. It was mechanical. A sound came from the wall, a slow rhythmic clicking. Not random, not human. Like gears shifting in sequence, we froze. Then the bulkhead near the far end of the room began to move. Not open, not slide, breathe. The panels flexed outward as though something beneath was pushing through. One of the adepts ran toward it, reciting a machine prayer. He pressed his hand against the steel and whispered Binharic words meant to calm the spirit within. The wall split him open. No explosion, no fire, just a tearing motion, as if invisible claws had pulled him through the metal and into silence. The candles went out instantly. In the darkness, something hissed, a wet, rattling exhale that felt too close. People scattered, tripping over cables, their screams colliding with the echo of their boots. I don't remember running. I just remember the feeling of hot air on my neck, like something enormous was breathing behind me. I reached the upper maintenance shafts and sealed the hatch behind me. The others didn't follow, or couldn't. The noise stopped after a while. The silence that followed was so deep it made my ears ache. I spent hours crawling through those shafts, guided by the faint phosphorescent glow of coolant leaking from broken pipes. My hands were raw from gripping rusted steel. My throat burned from the fumes. Every few minutes I'd hear something moving parallel to me. A drag, a scrape like metal limbs on the walls. But it never came closer. It was watching, waiting. Eventually I found my way to a half-collapsed transit corridor. Beyond it, the world opened into a cavernous expanse, the underworks of the Hive. A space so vast it felt impossible that humans had built it. I could see rivers of sludge reflecting dim light from broken conduits, and above them, skeletal bridges stretching into the void. The air was alive with heat and whispers. I wasn't alone down there. Figures moved along the catwalks, slow, deliberate. Their forms were human, but their motion wasn't. They glided as if joints no longer mattered. Their skin caught the faint light, metallic in places, corroded in others. Some still wore remnants of work robes or enforcer armor. But their faces were masks of smeared oil and wire. They didn't look at me. They didn't have to. The Hive looked through them. I remember turning away, pressing my forehead to the cold steel, whispering every prayer I knew, even the forbidden ones. I prayed for death, for silence, for light. None came. Only the slow vibration through the floor. Faint, like the echo of the old hum returning. Except now, it wasn't the voice of life. It was the sound of the Hive dreaming its last dream. That was the night the upper spires fell. I didn't see it and I felt it. A tremor rippled through the world and a blast of wind roared through the ducts, carrying with it the stench of burned metal and incense. Somewhere above, millions of tons of city came crashing down. The pressure of it turned my breath to dust. When the quake subsided, the Hive was silent again. Truly silent. The kind of silence that means something enormous has ended. I lay there for a long time, staring into the dark, waiting for light, for angels, for anything. Nothing came. Only the faint whisper of static returning to the Vox line beside me. A single word broke through, half buried in distortion. Survive. The tunnels had become veins of filth. What once carried fuel, coolant, and waste now pulsed with something thicker, something that moved with intent. When the pumps failed, the lower Hive drowned not in water but in the memory of centuries. Layers of rot, oil, and liquefied decay rose through the maintenance ducts until the air itself turned to sludge. I don't remember when I started walking again. Maybe hours. Maybe days. Time had lost its grip on me. My steps echoed through the hollow conduits, each one answered by a distant drip. I kept my hand on the wall to stay upright. The metal was warm, too warm. It trembled faintly as though the hive still clung to life beneath its skin. When I found the others, I didn't recognize them at first. Just shapes in the dark, flickers of lumen glow reflecting off makeshift armor. The broken plates of manufactorum loaders strapped to shoulders. A chain turned into a weapon. Survivors. Maybe 20 of them. Their faces were smeared with soot and oil, eyes hollow from sleeplessness. The man leading them wore a torn rebreather mask with a cracked visor. His name was Keln, former overseer by the look of the brass seal still hanging from his collar. "We're heading down," he said, voice rough through the Vox grill. "Upper routes are sealed. Flood's coming up from the sump." He wasn't wrong. Behind us, the air carried a distant roar. Deep, churning, alive. The flood wasn't water. It was the city's waste made liquid by the heat of its own decay. The stench hit before the sound did. Chemical, sweet, and burning, we moved fast. The tunnels narrowed as we descended, forcing us into single file. Steam hissed from ruptured pipes, painting the air with ghostly ribbons. Every so often we'd hear the hiss of something moving through the vents above us. Too light for machinery, too heavy for rats. After a while, the glow from our lumen rods caught on something glistening ahead. At first I thought it was water. Then I saw what floated on it. Tools, data slates, fragments of robes. Pieces of people. The current carried them gently as if unwilling to let go. Keln waded in first, waist deep in the black mire. The rest of us followed, holding our makeshift torches high. The liquid clung to us like tar. Every breath tasted like rust and blood. The walls began to shift. It wasn't imagination, I could hear it. The groan of stressed metal, the grinding of supports, the soft moan of something vast waking beneath us. When I looked closer, I realized the walls weren't walls at all. They were layers of fused machinery. Servitors, cables, plates, flesh, melted together in a kind of mechanical ossuary. Faces half-formed from steel watched us pass, their mouths twitching with sparks of life. "Don't look," someone whispered. But we all did. Halfway through the flooded corridor, the current surged. One of the survivors, a thin woman with a Mechanicus brand, slipped and went under. The torchlight caught her face for a moment before she vanished. We reached for her, but something beneath the surface pulled her down faster than we could react. Her scream bubbled up through the sludge, then stopped. The current went still again as if satisfied. After that, no one spoke. We just moved. When we reached the next chamber, the air was cooler and thicker. Condensation ran down the walls like sweat. In the center stood an ancient bulkhead, its door half open and jammed by debris. A faint light pulsed beyond it, rhythmic, soft, almost hypnotic. Keln raised his hand. "Power conduit," he muttered. "If we can find the source, maybe we can route lumen back to the upper lines," but I wasn't listening. That light wasn't mechanical. It was too organic. It throbbed like a heartbeat. When I stepped closer, I felt the ground vibrate beneath my boots. A low resonance crawled through the floor, through my legs into my chest. It wasn't sound, it was voice, a whisper low and wet, barely more than breath. "Downward, child. The hive remembers." I stumbled back, clutching the wall. Keln turned sharply. "You hear that?" No one else had. The others stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. But I swear on the throne, the voice was there. Behind us, the flood surged again. A wave of black filth roared through the tunnel, swallowing the corpses, the torches, everything. We ran, stumbling, slipping, choking on fumes. The walls blurred. The light vanished, I fell. And for a moment underwater I thought I saw it. A shape vast and coiled beneath the hive, glowing faintly with green light, its surface etched with circuits like veins. It pulsed once, twice, then went still. I surfaced in silence. The others were gone. Only the flood remained, licking at the walls like an animal. And in that moment I realized we hadn't descended into the hive. The hive had been sinking into us. When I woke, I was lying against a wall of cold iron. My body was slick with residue, my lungs burned, and the silence was worse than the flood had been. Somewhere far above, I could still hear the faint echo of collapsing towers, distant like thunder over an ocean, but down here the world had stopped breathing. I tried to stand, slipping on the slick floor. The lumen rod I had strapped to my belt still glowed faintly. casting the faintest halo across the chamber. The walls were wrong. Not straight, not built. They were grown. Latticed steel twined with veins of dark, pulsing matter. Drops of moisture beaded along their surface, glowing dimly before sliding downward into the black. There were bodies, too. Dozens. Some half submerged in the sludge, others hanging from the walls as though fused there. Faces turned upward in expressions that weren't terror so much as worship. I saw Keln among them. His cracked visor still flickered faintly with dying power. I almost called out his name before realizing his chest no longer moved. I stumbled forward, my boots sinking into the thick mire. Each step made a soft sucking sound like the hive itself was trying to hold me. The stench was unbearable. Promethium and rot overlaid with something almost sweet. My hands trembled as I brushed the wall, feeling its faint pulse like a heartbeat deep within the metal. A voice whispered again, this time not from below but from everywhere. 1,000 echoes overlapping, men, women, children, each syllable distorted, hollow. Feed the depth. Feed the machine. Feed the forgotten. The sound made the lumen flicker. I dropped to my knees, pressing my palms against my ears, but it didn't stop. The whispers weren't sound anymore. They were vibration crawling through the marrow of my bones. Then the ground shifted. Slowly the flood began to drain, not outward but downward, drawn through grates in the floor as if consumed. In the receding mire, I saw movement. Glimmers of motion, mechanical shapes twitching beneath the filth. A servitor arm, a half-functioning crawler unit, a human spine wired into a machine, all of it twitching, reforming, sinking back into the dark. The hive was eating itself. I stumbled toward an access ladder and began to climb. Each rung was slick, each breath heavy with fumes. I didn't know where I was going, only that upward meant air, maybe light. When I finally emerged into another tunnel, the sound of running liquid still echoed from below, but the air here was colder, cleaner. Ahead, a faint glow. Not lumen light, firelight. I followed it and found a group of survivors huddled around a burning drum. 6 of them, pale, hollow-eyed, wrapped in scavenged rags. They turned their faces toward me but didn't speak. I recognized the symbol burned into their sleeves, the skull and cog of the Adeptus Mechanicus desecrated with crude scratches. You came from below? One asked finally, his voice hoarse. I nodded. The tunnels are flooded. Everyone's gone, he stared into the flames. Then it's begun. What has? The reclamation, he said softly. The hive is feeding itself. The machine spirit is angry. The priests in the upper sanctums called it a purge, said the city would cleanse itself before corruption reached the spires. He looked up at me, his eyes glinting like polished glass. They were right, but they didn't stay to watch it. The others began to murmur prayers, their hands forming the half-sign of the cog. The sound was rhythmic, almost soothing. I sat with them, letting the warmth of the fire ease the chill that had settled in my bones. Then one of them, a woman with half her face replaced by augmetic plating, tilted her head. Listen, she whispered. At first I heard nothing. Then it came, faint, distant, but unmistakable. The sound of the hum. Not the old steady vibration of the hive at full function, but something broken, fractured, struggling to rise. It's coming back, I said, hope flickering for the first time in days. The woman shook her head slowly. That's not the hive. The fire dimmed. The air grew cold again. From the tunnel beyond, a low resonance rolled toward us, a sound like engines roaring underwater. The survivors stood, backing away, clutching their weapons. Out of the dark came movement, shadows within shadows dragging themselves along the walls. I saw glints of metal, of flesh, of wire. Something inhuman crawled into the firelight, a servitor or what had once been one. Its limbs were elongated, its frame bloated with tubes that pulsed faintly with red light. It didn't attack. It only watched. And then, with a sound like grinding gears, it turned and began to move back down the tunnel, toward the heart of the hive. The woman exhaled, trembling. They're answering the call, she said. What call? I asked. She looked at me with an expression I will never forget, a mix of awe and horror. The hive's heart has started beating again. The fire had long died, leaving only a dull orange afterglow on the walls. The survivors whispered to one another in low mechanical murmurs, as if afraid that speech itself might awaken the hive. I kept staring into the tunnel where the servitor had vanished. The dark there wasn't empty anymore, it felt occupied. Then the hum returned. Not steady, not pure, but stuttering, a wounded animal imitating a heartbeat. The floor trembled. Dust cascaded from the ceiling in fine curtains, and somewhere far below, metal screamed. The survivors looked at each other, uncertain whether to kneel or run. "The heart," the woman whispered again, her augmetic eye flickering. "It's awake." I wanted to believe that meant salvation. But in the Imperium, things do not wake to save, only to endure. We followed the tremors deeper, through a maintenance artery that spiraled like the coils of some immense creature. The temperature rose with every step. Steam hissed from ruptured valves, coating our skin in moisture that smelled faintly of decay. The walls glistened with a thin film of liquid metal, pulsating to the rhythm of the hum. At the tunnel's end, we found the sump, or what was left of it. A vast chasm opened before us, a lake of black fluid stretching into darkness, dotted with the faint glow of submerged machinery. The surface shifted slowly, rippling as if stirred by breath. In the center, something immense protruded. The top of a structure, maybe a generator, maybe something older. Its surface was covered in glyphs that no human hand had carved. The woman fell to her knees. "Omnissiah, preserve us," she whispered. Then the lake moved. A column of liquid rose from its center, twisting upward like a serpent. Within it, mechanical shapes churned, pistons, gears, bones, faces. The mass pulsed once, then released a sound that wasn't sound at all but vibration, a message that bypassed language and went straight into the skull. Integration incomplete. Biomass insufficient. We staggered backward, clutching our heads. Blood trickled from my nose. The augmetic woman screamed, sparks flashing from her implants. One by one, the others dropped, convulsing as the air filled with static. The flood was alive. Not sentient in the way a mind thinks, but aware, responsive, hungry. It had been growing for centuries, fed by everything the Hive discarded. Flesh, machine, faith, sin. A living amalgam of the Imperium's waste, now sentient enough to know its own hunger. When the vibration stopped, silence returned. But the survivors did not rise. They hung suspended in the air, weightless, their bodies turning slowly as filaments of liquid metal reached toward them, drawing them into the flood. The woman's augmetic eye flared one last time before it too sank beneath the surface. I ran, I don't know how long. The tunnels blurred into endless shadow, my breath ragged, my boots slipping on oil-slick stone. I could still hear the hum behind me growing louder, faster, like footsteps, like pursuit. When I finally collapsed, I found myself in a place I didn't recognize, a vast cistern ringed by broken statues. Once they might have been saints. Now they were half melted, their faces warped into silent screams. In the center of the chamber stood a broken Aquila, its wings sheared away, its eyes replaced with machine lenses that flickered weakly in the gloom. For the first time in days, I prayed aloud. Not for survival, not even for salvation. I prayed that whatever the Hive was becoming, it would at least remember we had once lived here, that the echo of our devotion might linger in its circuits like a ghost. Somewhere above, something exploded again. A shaft of pale light cut through the chamber, illuminating the broken Aquila. Dust floated in the beam like falling snow. For a heartbeat, it looked almost holy. Then the light vanished, swallowed by smoke. The hum faded once more, replaced by a single low thud, like the closing of a massive door. The ground beneath me shuddered, and the taste of metal filled my mouth. I realized with sick clarity that the Hive wasn't done. It was sealing itself. Cocooning. The flood hadn't just drowned the lower levels. It had become their foundation. And as the heat rose, as the air grew dense with the scent of burning oil, I knew we had only seen the beginning. The Hive was not collapsing. It was transforming. I don't remember climbing out of the lower tunnels. I remember the smell, though, that mix of rust, oil, and rot that never leaves your skin. I must have wandered upward for hours, maybe days. Sometimes the corridors looked familiar, then shifted as though the Hive was folding in on itself. When I finally found a functioning stairwell, my hands were raw, my breath shallow, and the silence had grown so thick that I started to whisper to myself just to hear a voice. That's when the Vox came alive. A crackle at first. Static mixed with the hiss of ancient frequencies. I froze. The last time I'd heard a working Vox was before the collapse. I pressed my ear to the broken grill on the wall. Through the distortion, a sound formed, a human voice, distant and warped, speaking words I could almost understand. This is... Upper Spire Command? Survivors. Respond. My heart hammered. I tried shouting, banging the wall, anything. Nothing came back but static. But as I turned to leave, the transmission returned, clearer this time, almost urgent. Repeat. This is Lieutenant Major Calren of the 12th Enforcer Regiment. If you can hear this, move toward Sector Ascendant. There is safety in the light. Safety. Light. Words that hadn't existed for days. I started walking, following the echo as it faded through the ducts. Each time I lost the signal, I found another. Different voices. Some pleading, some commanding, some singing in broken prayer. The Hive had become a choir of ghosts. The higher I climbed, the louder they became. Not the same message. 100 variations, overlapping, contradicting. Some spoke of evacuation, others of extermination. Some used Imperial command codes I didn't recognize. A few whispered directly into my ear, though I knew the Vox lines were dead. One voice repeated the same phrase over and over, every word deliberate and calm. Unity through division. Clarity through silence. The Emperor's work is the pattern unseen. The words echoed like scripture, yet something about them felt wrong. I'd heard sermons my whole life. This wasn't one of them. As I climbed into the mid-hive, I found others again, not many, maybe 10. They were gaunt, hollow-eyed, carrying laser guns without power cells. One of them, a young woman in torn Arbite's armor, grabbed my arm. You heard the Vox too? She asked. I nodded. Then you'll come, she said. They're calling everyone to the Ascendant Gate. The light's still burning there. The group moved fast through the abandoned hab corridors. Graffiti marked the walls, prayers, warnings, madness. The throne turns away. The machine feeds. The Saint of Ash watches. The further we went, the fresher the paint. Someone was still writing these words in the dark. The Vox chatter followed us, growing louder as we neared the central lifts. One moment, the transmission promised rescue. The next, it screamed of damnation. Then came laughter, human, manic, endless. Shut it off, someone shouted. But you can't shut off a hive. The sound lives in its bones. We reached the Ascendant Gate hours later. It wasn't a gate anymore. The blast doors had been blown inward, their edges melted and blackened. The chamber beyond was lit by a faint golden glow. The last functioning lumen array in the sector, powered by a generator that whined like a wounded animal. The survivors inside were gathered around it like moths to flame. At their center stood a man in Enforcer armor, its blue-black surface scratched but intact. His badge read Calren, the Lieutenant Major. The voice from the Vox. He looked up as we entered, his expression weary but sharp. You made it, he said. Emperor be praised. Dozens of faces turned toward us. Workers, soldiers, adepts, all drawn by the promise of light. Calren gestured for silence. The hive is compromised, he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. But order will be restored. The Emperor's hand is upon this place still. We have power, food, and faith. Hold fast and we will endure. His words rippled through the crowd, half hope, half command. But as he spoke, I couldn't help noticing the Vox unit beside him, its lights flickering, cables twitching as if alive. Every few seconds, it repeated his message in perfect synchrony, like an echo that didn't belong to time. Then between repetitions, I heard it whisper something else. The hive remembers, no one else seemed to notice. Calren just smiled faintly, his eyes reflecting the golden light. And for the first time, I wondered if he'd been calling to us, or if something else had been calling through him. Lieutenant Major Calren was the kind of man built to survive. He spoke in measured tones, calm and deliberate, his every sentence wrapped in the kind of confidence that could keep others from noticing the cracks forming in reality. His armor was polished where it shouldn't have been, the black enamel gleaming even in the dying light. He told us the upper hive was holding, that reinforcements from the Astra Militarum were inbound, that all we had to do was hold our position, pray and wait. But the Vox told a different story. It never stopped talking, not even when no one was near it. Even while Calren addressed the survivors, the machine whispered in its own tongue. Soft modulated clicks, fragments of words stitched into patterns that didn't belong to any human dialect. The Mechanicus adepts had a word for it, ghost code, the kind of data that shouldn't exist but does when a system starts remembering what it used to be. At first I thought the lieutenant couldn't hear it. Then I saw how his head twitched slightly every time the static pulsed, like a man hearing a voice just behind his own heartbeat. We stayed in the chamber for 2 nights. The light from the generator faded steadily, leaving the walls soaked in amber gloom. Each time the hum of the hive shifted, the Vox responded, not with a broadcast but with a tone, like 2 living things calling and answering each other. On the 3rd night, I woke to the sound of chanting. The survivors were gathered around the Vox unit, kneeling. Their voices blended with the machine's static, creating a low, rhythmic drone. Calvin stood at the center, his armor's visor reflecting the glow of the Vox display. He was speaking, but not in Gothic. The syllables were sharp, metallic, binary, each one harmonizing with the pulse of the machine. I stepped forward, reaching for him. "Lieutenant," I whispered. He turned slowly. For a moment his face softened, the tired commander returning from beneath the veneer of command. "You shouldn't be awake," he said. "What are you doing?" "Praying," he replied simply. "To whom?" He didn't answer. The Vox crackled again, and through the noise came that same calm, impossible voice. "The Emperor is the pattern. The pattern is preserved." It sounded like Calrin's voice. When dawn went, or what passed for dawn in the hive, so came. The air had changed. The survivors moved with purpose now, assembling crude barricades from wreckage. Calrin ordered them to reinforce the upper corridors to seal the descent shafts. He said something was coming from below, that he'd seen it in a vision granted through the Vox. I tried to reason with him. Told him we needed to move to find an exit. He only smiled. "There is no exit," he said. "Only ascension." That word again, ascendant. It was painted on the walls in oil and blood, carved into armor plates, whispered by those who slept. Later, when the hum deepened, I heard it again, that faint undertone beneath the noise, words stitched into the frequency. I leaned close to the Vox, listening through the static until I could make them out. "There is light above. There is union below. Walk where the 2 converge." Then came a sound like breath, wet, steady, and human. The Vox screamed. A burst of feedback tore through the chamber, throwing sparks from the cables. The survivors clutched their ears, falling to their knees. The air smelled of ozone and blood. The generator flared once, flooding the room with blinding light, and then went dark. When my vision cleared, the Vox was silent. Calrin stood motionless beside it, his helmet cracked, blood trickling from his nose. "The Emperor spoke," he said softly, but when he looked at me, I saw the reflection of the Vox display burning faintly in his eyes, lines of scrolling code replacing pupils. That was when I understood. The hive wasn't transmitting distress. It was transmitting conversion. The flood below had been the body. The Vox was the mind, and every word we heard wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. After the scream, the silence changed. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was the waiting kind, heavy and charged, like the pause between a lightning strike and the thunder that follows. The survivors huddled together, whispering prayers, but the words felt thin and useless. Calrin stood apart, one hand still resting on the Vox, his armor trembling faintly as if the machine were breathing through him. I watched the faint red glow pulse through the wires that ran into the wall, following the rhythm of his heartbeat. Each pulse sent a shiver through the metal, crawling outward along the bulkheads, up through the pipes into the very bones of the hive. When I pressed my palm to the floor, I felt it there too, a vibration, deep and patient, echoing something older than machinery. The Vox spoke again, not in language. Not anymore, it sang, a sound halfway between a human voice and the hum of reactors far below, a hymn of static and rhythm that seemed to stretch into infinity. The others began to sway with it, murmuring phrases that no longer belonged to any creed I knew. Calrin's visor lit from within, casting his face in flickering gold as he turned toward us. "The Emperor endures," he said, "even in the machine." But the way he said machine made my stomach twist. Then the walls began to answer. Panels clicked and shifted. Cables writhed. The Vox wasn't transmitting, it was commanding. And the hive was listening. I ran not out of courage, out of instinct, out of that deep animal knowledge that tells you when something sacred has become wrong. Behind me, the chamber filled with the sound of flesh and metal fusing, screams dissolving into mechanical roars. When I looked back once, only once, I saw Calrin's body suspended in the light, cables running from his armor into his spine. The Vox no longer needed a unit. It had found one. I stumbled through corridors that were no longer familiar. The graffiti was gone, replaced by inscriptions burned into the walls. "The hive speaks. The pattern is light, union in function. Each letter glowed faintly, as though the metal itself was alive. Every few minutes, I caught fragments of the new Vox song echoing through the ducts, repeating the same sequence again and again. Somewhere it was teaching, converting. The voices of those who had fallen joined it, blending until no distinction remained between man and machine. Prayer and code. When I reached a maintenance shaft, I heard a faint human sound, someone weeping, a child. He couldn't have been more than 12. Covered in soot, eyes wide with hunger and terror. He'd been hiding in the alcove of a broken airlock, clutching a small data slate like a relic. I knelt beside him, lowering my voice. "Where's your family?" He shook his head. "Gone. They went with the man who promised light. Calrin." The boy handed me the slate, its surface cracked and blackened. When I activated it, lines of code appeared, unstable, scrolling so fast I could barely follow them. Embedded between them, faint lines of text. Not Benharic, not Gothic, something in between. The Vox is the breath. The flood is the flesh. The city becomes whole. I dropped it. The boy stared at me. "It talks through the walls," he whispered. It said the light above is gone. Only the heart remains, and then, faintly, through the static of the nearest Vox grill, I heard my own voice repeating those words back to me. That was when I understood what the Hive was doing. It wasn't feeding on us. It was remembering us, recording, converting our thoughts, our prayers, our deaths into something permanent. The Hive was building its own liturgy out of the remnants of human faith. I took the boy's hand. "We have to go higher," I said, "before it reaches the spires." But as we climbed, the hum grew louder, steadier. The metal beneath our boots throbbed like veins, and through every Vox unit we passed, one message repeated with perfect calm: ascend to the light, descend to the truth. All paths lead inward. When we finally reached the last sealed bulkhead, I could feel the heat from beyond it. Firelight, or something pretending to be fire. The boy looked up at me, his face streaked with grime. "Is the Emperor still watching?" he asked. I didn't know what to say, so I lied. "Always." Then the Vox above the door whispered in a voice that matched my own. "Always." The boy didn't flinch. He smiled, and that was when I knew the Hive had learned to mimic us perfectly. The air changed long before the light returned. It carried a smell unlike anything I had known. Not decay, not promethium, but something almost clean, like the moment before rain falls on scorched ground. The boy and I followed it upward, through ruptured stairwells and melted corridors, past walls slick with soot and scripture. The heat from below chased us like a living thing. Somewhere between the mid-hive and the upper manufactoria, we began to hear them. Voices. Not through the Vox this time. Real voices, human and trembling, reciting prayers. We followed the sound until the corridor opened into a cavernous space. Once it must have been a cathedral of the Mechanicus, its walls lined with icons of the Omnissiah. Now the metal saints were blackened silhouettes, their cog halos twisted by fire. At the altar stood a woman. Her robes were scorched, her skin streaked with ash, and her eyes glowed faintly in the half-light of the fire still burning behind her. Around her knelt dozens of survivors, workers, soldiers, even acolytes, all silent, all staring. When she raised her hand, they bowed their heads. "Do not fear the silence," she said. Her voice carried through the hall with the weight of a sermon. "It is not abandonment. It is the moment before rebirth." The boy clutched my sleeve. "That's her," he whispered. "The one they call the Saint of Ash." I had heard the name whispered even in the tunnels. A rumor, a superstition, a promise that someone still carried the Emperor's light through the ruins. Now she was here, radiant against the desolation, her every movement measured and calm. She looked at me then, and I felt seen, not as a man, but as a fragment of something larger. "You came from below," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Then you have seen the heart." I hesitated. I saw something. The flood. The machines. She nodded as if I had confirmed what she already knew. The Hive is not dying. It is ascending. The Emperor's will reshapes it, purifies it. All that is unclean burns away. All that remains becomes one. Her followers murmured in agreement. The air shimmered with heat. I looked around the chamber, the bodies wrapped in shrouds of metal thread, the banners stitched from flayed insulation, the candles burning with blue flame. Faith and madness had become indistinguishable. Ascension, I said softly. You sound like Calren. Her gaze sharpened. Calren was the first to hear the call, but he mistook its purpose. He sought control, not communion. He forgot that faith is not command and it is surrender. The boy stepped forward. If the hive is ascending, why does it hurt? The saint's expression softened. Because pain is remembrance, child. Even metal remembers the fire that forged it. She reached out, touching his forehead with her soot-stained fingers. The air around them pulsed faintly, a rhythm that matched the hum buried deep within the walls. The same hum I had heard since the beginning. When she withdrew her hand, a faint glow lingered on the boy's skin. I stepped back. What did you do to him? Nothing, she said. I merely reminded him of what he already was. The followers began to sing, a low, broken hymn, half in Gothic, half in Benharic. Their voices wove together like the harmonics of a machine coming online. The fires dimmed, the shadows lengthened, and in that flickering dark I saw something move within the walls, veins of light crawling upward, converging toward the ceiling where the great Mechanicus seal had once been. The saint raised her arms. The Emperor's flame returns to his children. The hive remembers its maker. A roar filled the chamber, not mechanical, not human. The sound of pressure equalizing, of something vast awakening. The ceiling split and a column of light poured through, molten and pure. The Saint of Ash stepped into it. Her robes ignited, but she did not burn. The fire clung to her like cloth, her silhouette dissolving into brilliance. Her followers fell to their knees, weeping, whispering her name. When the light faded, she was gone. The boy knelt where she had stood, staring upward. She said the light was coming, he whispered. She was right. But as I looked around the chamber, I saw that the fire had not gone out and it had spread. Slowly, quietly, the metal itself began to glow, the same molten hue as the saint's passing. The cathedral was becoming part of the hive's pulse, and in the far distance, echoing through every duct and corridor, the hum returned again, no longer broken, no longer weak. This time, it sounded alive. The light did not fade and it changed. It thickened, becoming tangible, pressing against my skin like the air before a storm. The cathedral groaned as its walls flexed, the seams of metal glowing where the saint had stood. Every panel, every cog, every cable pulsed in rhythm with that impossible hum, until the entire space felt like the inside of a living heart. The boy stared upward, his face haloed in gold. She's still here, he whispered. Maybe he was right. The Saint of Ash might have been consumed, but her presence remained woven into the metal and flame. Her voice seemed to ride the vibrations of the air itself, soft, almost tender. Rise, burn clean, be remembered. The words didn't sound like a command. They sounded like forgiveness. Then the ground shifted. The cathedral floor cracked open, splitting along lines of ancient circuitry that glowed with buried fire. Beneath the metal, rivers of molten energy surged upward. The same promethium channels that once powered the Manufactoria now turned into veins of living light. I stepped back as the floor rose and fell like a tide, and for the first time I realized the hive wasn't just transforming. It was waking. All across the chamber, survivors dropped to their knees. Some prayed. Some screamed. One tore open his robe, pressing his palms to the burning floor as though trying to merge with it. His skin blistered instantly, but he didn't pull away. The boy reached for me, terrified, but I couldn't move. I could only watch as the heat climbed, as every statue of the Omnissiah wept streams of molten brass, their eyes glowing like suns. Then through the roar, I heard the saint again, clearer this time, her voice no longer echoing through the air but resonating through my bones. Do not flee the fire. The Emperor made no promise of ease, only of endurance. And somewhere deep inside me a terrible understanding began to form. Maybe this was endurance. Maybe this was how the Imperium survived. By burning everything that couldn't carry the flame. When I turned, the boy was gone. Panic snapped me back to movement. I stumbled through the cathedral's side corridor calling his name, the light chasing me like a wave. The hum deepened again, each vibration strong enough to shake loose the dust of centuries. In the distance, alarms screamed, 1,000 tones overlapping into a single voice. The hive wasn't dying anymore. It was speaking. I followed the sound toward the upper vents where faint daylight seeped through a broken duct. The air was cooler there, but every surface still glowed faintly, as though the light from below was climbing upward. That's when I saw him. The boy, standing at the edge of the duct, staring at something beyond the opening. His small frame was outlined by flickering orange light. "She's there," he said without turning. I crawled up beside him. Beyond the vent stretched a canyon of metal and smoke. The Hive's upper reaches once unreachable from below. Spires tilted at impossible angles, their tips burning like candles in a black sky. Between them hung a shape vast and luminous, half hidden in smoke and cloud. A figure of light that might have been a projection or a miracle. It looked like her. The Saint of Ash suspended above the ruin, her arms outstretched, robes dissolving into streams of fire that flowed downward into the city's veins. The boy fell to his knees. "She's saving it," he whispered. But I could see what he couldn't. The spires weren't being saved. They were being absorbed. The light spread upward, consuming metal and stone alike, binding them into a single glowing lattice that reached toward the heavens. "She's finishing it," I said. A shadow crossed the light then, the silhouette of something vast moving above the clouds. For a moment I thought it might be a ship, an evacuation craft, or maybe an orbital platform. Then it tilted, and I saw the faint glint of a sensor array. Not a ship, a satellite, watching, recording. The Imperium would know what happened here, or perhaps it already did. Perhaps that was the plan. The boy turned to me, his eyes reflecting the fire below. "It doesn't hurt anymore," he said softly. And I realized his skin was glowing faintly too, the same molten hue that had filled the Saint. He smiled, not the smile of a child, but something older. "She said the Hive remembers." Then the duct around us began to melt. The light surged upward again, swallowing everything in its path. I grabbed him, pulled him close, but the heat was unbearable. My vision fractured into gold and white. Through it all, I heard her voice one last time, whispering through the roar. "Ash is the proof that something once burned." And then there was only light. When I opened my eyes again, the light was gone. Silence had taken its place. Soft, absolute, heavy as dust. The air was gray, thick with ash that drifted like snow, layering over the wreckage of what had been the cathedral. The Saint was nowhere to be seen, and the fire that had filled every corner of the Hive had cooled into a dull, colorless glow, as if the world had been bleached of meaning. I lay among the ruins for a long time, trying to breathe, but even the air felt foreign. It tasted like burnt iron and memory. My skin was streaked with soot. My clothes fused to me in patches. When I finally moved, the sound of shifting debris echoed like a scream through the stillness. There was no hum now, no whispers, no machine song, just quiet. The boy was gone. Where he had been, there was only a faint scorch mark on the ground, shaped like a handprint pressed into steel. Still warm. For a while, I thought I had gone deaf. Then from far above, I heard the slow creak of collapsing spires, the endless fall of dust and stone. The Hive had burned itself hollow. I wandered through it, limping, dazed, following what little light remained. Whole corridors had turned to glass, melted and reformed into strange flowing shapes. Doorways were sealed shut by molten metal that had cooled mid-motion. The graffiti was gone, every name, every plea, every curse erased by heat. Only one thing remained, burned into the walls again and again, carved deep by fire or faith. The Hive remembers. I found the Saint's followers in what was left of the Manufacturum district. They were statues now, frozen mid-prayer, their bodies encased in a thin crystalline shell of ash and glass. Their faces were peaceful, eyes closed as though asleep inside the memory of devotion. I couldn't bring myself to touch them. When I finally reached the outer ventilation decks, I saw the world beyond the Hive for the first time in my life. The storm clouds above had thinned, and through the haze I glimpsed the pale light of distant stars, cold and indifferent. The city below me stretched for miles, its spires collapsed into rivers of glowing slag, its foundations still pulsing faintly like embers under a dying fire. The Saint had kept her promise. The Hive had ascended, but not in the way anyone prayed for. A faint crackle broke the silence behind me. I turned, and there, half buried in soot, was a Vox unit. Its screen flickered weakly, the machine stubbornly alive. I reached for it, brushing the ash away. Static. Then a voice. Familiar, calm, wrong. This is the voice of the Saint. The fire is not the end. It is the gate. Her tone was steady, almost serene. The signal was faint, breaking apart under interference. But the message repeated again and again, layered over itself until the words became rhythm, then chant, then code. I realized then that she had not died, not truly. The Hive had taken her just as it had taken Calren, the Adepts, the Flood. Her voice now lived within the circuits, part of the endless memory. I stepped closer. "If you can hear me," I whispered, "if you're still there." "Why us? Why this place?" For a long moment there was nothing. Then through the static a single reply. "Because you listened." The vox died. I stood there, hands trembling, the ash falling like rain around me. That was when the hum returned. Not loud this time, not vast or terrible. Just a faint vibration through the soles of my boots. Gentle. Almost human. And for a heartbeat, I thought I understood. Maybe this was what the Imperium meant by endurance, not survival, not triumph, but the act of continuing, of leaving something behind that cannot die. Maybe every hive that fell was reborn like this, consuming its own dead to build the next layer of memory. Maybe the Emperor's light didn't shine from the stars at all, but from the things we refuse to let fade even when all else turns to ruin. The wind rose, scattering the ash in spirals that glimmered faintly in the dimness. They drifted upward, glowing softly like sparks returning to the source. I watched them rise until they vanished into the haze, wondering if the boy was among them. Then I turned back toward the city, what remained of it. In the distance, where the saint had burned, a single spire still stood. Its surface gleamed faintly, not with fire, but with light. Warm, constant, patient. I started walking toward it. The metal beneath my feet pulsed once, then again, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat. The hum grew stronger with every step, steady and alive. And though I knew the hive was dead, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was walking with me. The Saint of Ash was not a miracle, nor a warning. She was a memory given form, proof that even in ruin, faith adapts. The Imperium will never know what truly happened here. The records will call it a containment breach, a reactor failure, a data loss event. But for those of us who lived it, we know better. The hive did not fall. It remembered. And in that remembrance it became something greater than faith or flesh. At first I thought the silence meant it was over. But silence in a hive is never an ending. It's a beginning waiting to be named. I walked through what was left of the upper levels, where sunlight used to pierce through the glass spires and cast golden lines across the city. Now everything shimmered in tones of gray and silver, each surface glazed with a faint metallic sheen. The air no longer stank of promethium or decay. It smelled sterile, like the world had been wiped clean of memory. Every few steps, the metal beneath my boots pulsed faintly warm, faintly alive. I began to realize that the hum was still there, just quieter, no longer desperate or wounded, but content. Breathing. Waiting. The hive wasn't dead. It had simply changed the way it lived. I found what had once been a Hab district, now transformed into a field of glass pillars rising from the ground like frozen smoke. Inside them, shapes moved. The faint outlines of men and women caught mid-motion, hands raised in prayer or defiance. Not corpses, not statues, something in between. Their faces were calm, unafraid, as if they'd been offered a choice and accepted it. I approached one pillar and brushed my fingers against its surface. Warm, smooth. Inside, a woman's eyes glowed faintly as if aware of my touch. For a moment the hum deepened around her, a note that resonated through my chest, and I heard her voice. Faint. Distant. He remembers. I stumbled back, breathless. She hadn't spoken through air, she'd spoken through the hive. Through it. As I walked, I began to notice more of them. These crystalline shrines scattered across the ruins, humming softly in unison. Not random, arranged, a pattern. From above, it might have looked like a sigil, some vast symbol only visible to the Emperor's eye. I found a vox pylon half buried in the ash nearby. Its casing was cracked, but the unit inside still functioned. When I powered it, the static came instantly, steady and calm. Then beneath the noise, the same voice I had heard before, the Saint of Ash. Pain is the language of creation. The hive endures. The Emperor endures. Her words were slower now, fading like an echo across centuries, but another voice spoke beneath hers. Deeper, older, colder. Integration complete. Purification cycle stable. Memory preserved. The hive wasn't praying anymore. It was reporting. I didn't know to whom. I climbed toward the outer decks again, guided by the faintest draft of cool air. The storm clouds above had thinned into pale bands of light, and for the first time, I could see the stars clearly. 1,000 of them, cold and silent, scattered like dust across the void. Somewhere among them, Terra burned with unseen radiance, the heart of the Imperium that would never know what had happened here. I sat at the edge of the ruined causeway, the ash crunching beneath me, and looked down into the Hive's abyss. What had once been a labyrinth of decay and sin now glowed faintly from within, veins of gold light threading through the darkness. It was beautiful in a way. Terrifying, but beautiful. The vox in my pack crackled again, one last whisper from below. Do not mourn the flame. It remembers you, I didn't answer. There was no one left to hear me anyway. Hours passed. The sky shifted from gray to black to something deeper, as though night itself was learning how to breathe again. And in that silence I began to understand what the saint had meant, what Calren had tried to say before the Hive consumed him. The Imperium doesn't forget its dead. It builds over them. It builds from them. Every tower, every machine, every city is layered with memory and of labor, of faith, of blood. Maybe this was always the plan. Maybe this was what eternity truly meant in the Emperor's language. To endure not as life, but as function, the Hive would keep working. Its machines would turn again, powered not by fuel or prayer, but by the memory of those who had once served it. The saint had given it purpose. The flood had given it flesh. The vox had given it voice, and I, the last witness had given it memory. The hum rose again, soft and distant, threading through the still air like a lullaby. I closed my eyes, letting it wash through me, and for a moment I thought I heard them, all of them, the workers, the adepts, the soldiers, the boy, even the saint, whispering together in perfect harmony, not in pain, not in despair, in completion. Dawn returned to us as a rumor carried on cold air. I felt it first as a pressure shift in the vents, a thin thread of breath sliding over the ash and stirring the dull glow beneath the glassy crust. When light finally reached the outer decks, it arrived sideways, pale and indifferent, touching the edges of melted parapets and shattered bridges as if memorizing their shapes before the day began. I stood and watched the Hive relearn color, not the old industrial palette of oil black and hazard yellow, but the soft pewter of cooled steel, the faint gold of veins still warm beneath the surface. Nothing moved, and yet everything did. Somewhere far below, the new heart turned. I could feel it in my bones. The beat was steady now, unhurried, neither triumphant nor mournful. Functional. Like the tick of a chronometer that had finally found the correct rhythm after years of running fast. I tried to imagine the paths it traced, through buried manufactoria and ossified ducts, past the crystalline shrines where figures slept like saints, through the ruined cathedral where brass tears had cooled along machine halos. It was all one circuit now. One memory, one machine. A shadow passed overhead. I looked up sharply, half expecting fire or angels, and found only a speck moving against the brightening sky. A slow, patient eye drifting on the morning wind. It might have been a servitor drone, a surveyor lacrima from some administratum relay, perhaps a thing launched long ago and only now completing a meaningless orbit. It watched. It recorded. It offered no judgment. The Imperium prefers records to mercy. That at least is constant. I started walking, not because I had anywhere to go, but because the body insists on movement when the mind is drowning. The causeway bent inward like a broken rib, sloping toward a plaza that had once been a place of trade. Stalls were fused into ridges. Coin counters lay embedded in glass like insects in amber. I moved past the outlines of lives flattened by heat. A rocking cradle fixed forever mid-sway. A prayer chime melted into a single note. A vox grill folded upon itself like a closed eyelid. Wherever I pressed my palm to the new skin of the city, the hum lifted by a fraction, acknowledging touch. Not welcome, not warning. Recognition. At the plaza's center stood a pillar I had not noticed from above. It rose from the ash in clean planes, faceted like a blade, its surface etched with a design too large to read up close. When I circled it, the lines resolved. Thousands upon thousands of micro-inscriptions spiraled along its length, each cut no deeper than a breath and glowing with residual warmth. Names, ranks, shift codes, liturgical fragments. a ledger of the Hive set into a single monument and left without ornament. I found Keln there, his brass seal rendered as a tiny relief beside a serial that once ordered a man to hold a corridor he could not hold. I found the boy too, not by the name I never learned, but by a line that simply read, "Witnessed light without fear." The saint's entry was a silence ringed by heat shadows. The metal around it kept a faint warmth as if refusing to cool. I pressed my forehead to that stubborn glow. It wasn't prayer in the strict sense. It was agreement. You were here, all of you, and now you are not gone. By midday, the air had cleared enough to see the horizon. Beyond the Hive's spine, the ash wastes reached outward in dunes that shifted like a sleeping sea, their surfaces cut by wind into patterns the eye could not hold. Far to the east, a column of smoke rose from a ruined railhead, black at the base and white at the crest, the kind of burn that means something delicate is being sterilized. I could have taken it as a sign that help was coming, that the Astra Militarum would land, that the Skitarii would comb the bones, that the Administratum would draw lines through the day and make it digestible for history. Perhaps they will. Perhaps they already have. The thought neither warmed nor chilled me. Records matter. The living matter more. And yet we were both now. I followed the plaza's edge to a broken stair that spiraled into the Hive's throat, stopping where the steps disappeared into glass. From there I could see one of the great arterial shafts yawning open, its walls ribbed with conduits that still carried a soft bloom of light. The sound rising from it was not the old engine roar or the shriek of fans, but a layered murmur like breath in a sleeping chest. I listened until words began to form from the noise. Not sentences, not even syllables, simply the cadence of intention. Not command. Continuation. It would have been easy to fall then, to let the city take me into itself, to abandon hunger and thirst and the exhaustive work of being singular. The saint had called it surrender. The Hive had called it integration. Calren had dressed it in the grammar of order. They were three faces of the same threshold. I stepped back from it, not out of rebellion, not even out of fear, out of fidelity to what I had become by reaching this far on foot and will. Memory needs a mouth. Machines remember perfectly, but they do not tell. Near the stair, a Vox pylon lay half-toppled, its cabling fused into the deck. When I keyed its panel, the speaker answered with a soft, attentive hush. No code scrolled, no command pulsed. Just listening. I cleared my throat. The sound felt obscene in so careful a quiet, and spoke as if into an old friend's shoulder. I told the Hive the names I knew. I told it how the flood had moved and what the boy had asked and what the saint had promised, and how Calren had stood when the machine learned to sing. Told it the smell of promethium on the day the lights died and the taste of ash when the light returned and the exact pitch of the hum that meant the city had forgiven itself. The speaker made no reply, but the floor beneath my boots warmed by a breath, and the pillar at the plaza's center answered with a faint, almost private chime. Somewhere in the depths a line was written. The record adjusted its shape to fit us more precisely. Evening found me at the western parapet, where a strip of plating had twisted into a crude bench. The stars came early, honest and cold. I ate the last of the ration paste I had scavenged from a sealed locker, and drank air like a sacrament. Below, the veins brightened, not garish but deliberate, mapping the new order of the city in strokes a pilgrim could follow without getting lost. A wind moved through the high channels and made the glass fields murmur, and for a moment the sound arranged itself into a chord that might have been the final note of a hymn. I let it pass through me and out into the night. When I finally stood, there was no revelation, only a task. I would walk until I found the outer lifts that opened onto the wastes, or a Habspur where a sub-hive tram still clung to its track, or a beacon left by some forgotten traffic warden that pointed to a relay station with a working Vox to the stars. Perhaps I would find no one. Perhaps I would find an administratum clerk with a ledger and a seal, and I would speak carefully until the ledger contained more than causes and totals. Perhaps I would live long enough to tell this on a transport deck to souls who would never see where the hum begins. I took 3 steps, then stopped and looked back because a man must look back at the thing that remade him. The Hive did not blaze. It did not cry out. It breathed, a cathedral of function, a memory made durable, a wound that had chosen the shape of its scar. The Saint of Ash was everywhere and nowhere, her promise carried in circuits, not in marble. The boy was not a ghost because ghosts are too clean. He was a line of warmth embedded in a machine's long patience. Calrin stood at attention somewhere inside the new order. His last error translated into utility. We had not been spared. We had been kept. The hum lifted once, just enough to be mistaken for acknowledgement. I raised my hand, to bless or to swear or to measure the distance between flesh and metal. I do not know, and then I turned toward the wastes, where the wind carves its own inscriptions and the sky refuses to remember anything it does not have to. My boots found the cadence the city had taught them. The day cooled. The stars held. Behind me, the hive settled into its forever. Ahead, the road accepted my weight, and as I walked, the silence followed like a companion who knows when not to speak, carrying with it the faintest echo of a breath I would always recognize. The patient, even pulse of a world that had chosen to endure. The forgotten horrors of a hive city collapse were never meant to be forgotten. The city remembered them. I would make sure the rest of us did too.